Yeah. So
Good morning. Felice here from Better After 50. And today I am speaking with Dr. Galit Atlas. Hello, Galit.
you know, thank you for inviting me to talk to you.
I am so thrilled that you're here. I read your op-ed in the LA Times. The title completely grabbed me, particularly at this holiday time. The title being "1 in 4 adults are estranged from family and paying a psychological price." That's a grabber.
Yeah, I didn't even know how much of a grabber that was when I wrote it.
Well, before we get into this, Dr. Atlas, we'll call you Galit. Did I say that properly?
Yes, that's totally great.
Great. And you can give us a little more of the resume than what I have here because it's long and fantastic. Is not only a psychoanalyst and a creative arts therapist and a faculty um, member at the postdoctoral program at NYU.
Yes.
uh, and published 3 books for clinicians and is currently publishing a book for the general public, which is, what's it titled?
Emotional inheritance.
Emotional Inheritance. Wow, we're going to need to read that. So is there anything you want to add to the background that I might have missed there?
No, that's great. There is a lot. There is always a lot to, but a quick Google will give people everything. That's my main affiliation is with the postdoctoral program for psychotherapy and psychoanalysis at
Okay,
NYU.
fantastic. So let's just get right into this topic, which is really a hot topic. You start with the trend on Instagram for hashtag about toxic parents.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think for me, it started with, of course, from my practice, like many, many things that I see in my practice and talking with colleagues. And then one of my colleagues said, "Yeah, but go on Instagram, you will see there is a whole trend of Instagram therapists that encourage kids to take care of themselves and disconnect from their parents," which I have to say, this is not a new, I mean, the trend on Instagram is more or less new. The fact that people are disconnecting or the estrangement is not a new thing, right? It is just what we noticed that it used to be something that children of abusive parents used to do, which was many times justified, right? And became something that people do in order to manage conflicts in the family and other disagreements or other issues in the family. And
So,
so,
so you're talking about, I mean, the trend, the words I keep hearing are canceling people, canceling your parents. Is that what we're talking about here? It's a little harsh.
I
Very
think that's a
harsh.
very, that's a provocative way of saying that, right? And I think a lot of young people feel very dismissed by that definition, right? Calling them canceling their parents makes them feel dismissed as if it's just a trend and they don't have their own mind and decisions in that. And of course, nobody wants to think that they don't have that the culture impacts them, right?
Right.
I think that this is specifically true to a certain generation that, in some ways, is very, very, very dependent on their parents, and
Ah,
you know, which and again, not necessarily to kids of abusive parents, but something that is related to power. Because if you think about the word canceling, it is about injustice and power dynamics. And when and obviously, and as I say in the op-ed, a family is a system where power is not equal, right? So a lot of kids in retrospect come and say, this was really not good for me, or I disagree with you about something, or right? Again, we can talk about reasons why. I think there are reasons that are more emotional, but also sometimes reasons that are more practical, like um, marriages to people that don't like the parents, or divorce, which they call gray divorce. Did you hear that expression? Gray
gray
divorce.
divorce later in life when 50s or 60s.
Yes, and the children have a very strong reaction to that divorce, and sometimes much more than younger kids, they take the side of the least powerful parent.
Ah,
So that creates estrangement many times. Again, interestingly, I think that this is not, sometimes it's a temporary thing. It's
right.
not, it's just a way to manage something, and then they come back, which is important to tell parents, because the heartbreak of parents is very real. But the truth is that when I wrote the piece, I also, as you notice probably, talked about the damage it does to the kids themselves, because I see them as well, right?
Right.
There is
Well,
something there. There's a scar.
right. So I think the reason this conversation, there's a lot of reasons this conversation I think is very important and timely during the holidays, is because of a number of things. We're coming off the pandemic where there has been tremendous dependency, probably more
Right.
than ever, of the younger generation with the parents, but also the idea that parents are feeling, as the kids feel less powerful because they're dependent, the parents feel anxious and nervous about what their role is because it's so different than maybe what they anticipated.
Right.
And then to think that their kids just aren't going to talk to them, that there is a trend
Right.
uh, that's happening. And I don't know what age group you're talking about, or whether it's just the 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds. Is it Gen X? Is it millennials? But anyway, these disempowering kind of situations where life is changing without you having an ability
Yeah.
to weigh in or negotiate. I mean, is that what we're talking about here? It's just going to happen. I mean, is it going to be sudden? Is that the trend?
Listen, if that is really a trend, trends change, right? So the fact that it's happening doesn't mean that it's going to happen forever. And again, we have to think about nuances. We have to understand that not every child that estranged from the parent is because of a trend. The trend is really something, when we call it a trend, I think it's important to say it's something that allows something more than it used to allow it, right? There used to be much more of a stigma around that. And now, when you see younger kids, and I'm talking about kids in their 20s and 30s, actually, and I would say, at least in my own statistics, especially 30s, these are children that, first of all, related to dependency. It's much more painful to be dependent on your parents when you're in your 30s
Mm,
than in your 20s. So there is already something there that is difficult. Um, and so I think that's part of it for sure, the dependency on the parents.
right,
And I think that it's a way to manage something emotionally,
right.
right? And when you see these kids, you sometimes hear the conversation between them, right? I hear, and the conversation is something that, um, it's part of the conversation. I guess that's what I want to say. It's part of the conversation, that normalizes something that did not used to be sort of normalized.
Okay. So now we've established that this can happen and is happening. So speaking to the Better After 50 reader,
Mhm.
we if this happens, are there certain tools that one can access? Are there certain strategies that you would recommend to the holidays are coming up. Let's be specific. The holidays are coming up. There's tension in the family. There's been a lack of communication with kids. There's a testiness going on, and you're coming together. Or you're not coming together, or
Not
somebody's
coming together.
threatening, you're not, somebody's threatening not to come. Is there a are
Yeah.
there any tools you can recommend for the parent?
Yeah, I believe, again, first of all, as you hear, my caution is really about dismissing something as a trend, as if what the child themselves is bringing, right? I think about parents sending their children these op-ed and saying, "You see, you're part of a trend," and I think that backfires. I want to say big time,
Right.
because that I really feel that, first of all, parents should not be dismissive of what their children are saying, because they are trying to negotiate something real. It is not that they make it up, right? And so, there are two levels of how to address it. One is, of course, address the bigger thing, right? I think the urgency of the holidays is actually a problem, because usually when parents say, but I need you to come for the holiday, right? And there is some sense of urgency that makes the younger people, the children, feel really disrespected,
Right.
and I think respect is a big part of what we're talking about. When we talk about culture, the culture have changed, right? In many ways. To even the definition of abuse have changed. What we used to, right? What older people used to get from their parents that they would never call abuse, younger people call abuse, right? There is something in the culture that
Oh,
changed,
totally. Yeah,
right?
exactly. Being yelled at or even, yeah,
Right, smacked, right? And I think
it's
that
just
that's
like,
that's part of the problem, though,
right.
right? Because then many children, when they come to their parents and say you are abusive, the parents look at them, what the hell are you talking about? I was abusive? My parents used to beat me up. I never did that to you. I never. And you know how many emails I got from parents? I got hundreds of emails from parents and children, and many of them are about that misunderstanding of a child saying, you scared me, you yelled at me when you were young. And
Yes.
the parent said, I was never abusive. I was so, if you imagine what my parents did to me and how they spoke to me, that's the way we spoke to children. So there is a cultural clash there, right?
Right. Yeah.
You recognize that?
So the whole respect piece in terms of, I like what you say about the urgency of the holidays and trying to resolve this so you can show up or figure it out in time for something,
Right.
and how that affects, I understand what you're saying, affects the depth of what's happening here, that it isn't going to be fixed in just for a holiday.
Exactly. The opposite. I want to say one more thing about that, because what I noticed is that we I'm saying we as if I'm the parent, right? Because thinking about how to convince a child to come back home, you usually use the part of yourself that the child hates the most, right? If you are, and I'll tell you why, because the parent is in distress, the parent is hurt, the parent is angry, right? And the parts of ourselves that is we right that we become when we are angry or hurt is what our kids know from when we were hurt and angry in their childhood, right? So if they say I had a manipulative parent, I promise you that you're going to try to manipulate your child to come to the holiday, right? Because they know us. If I'm an angry parent, right, and I used to yell at my children, so if I try to get them back home, I will be upset and angry. And that's exactly, you see that. So the worst part of us that the child really is trying to tell us was hurtful is the part that is going to come up, and that's what we have to watch out for.
So the parent needs to do some work.
I absolutely think the parent needs to do some work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
And
parent needs
reframe and really think about their patterns of how they speak to their kids, their adult kids. Like
to,
really listen and
listen to what
try.
the children are telling you. Listen to it, respect them, understand it. I think because of the generational gap,
Right.
what I see is that many of the parents are really dismissive of what the children are saying.
Okay. So this is a really important conversation. The work is for the parents right now. I mean, in this particular situation.
I think obviously there is work for the children to do. Right. I'm not taking them off the hook. They have their own work of growth to do. They have their own work of some children are there is addiction or mental health issues. I mean, I don't want to completely say it's not the children's work. I think everybody needs to work, but because we're talking about parents, certainly there is a lot of work for parents to do there.
Okay. So I think one of the topics as well on this work, parents working to understand how to talk to their children or their young adults, and sometimes children's an interesting word when we're talking about 30-year-olds or
Right.
20, in a way that is not their normal, their pattern that they've had, to shift the way they speak. Also has a big effect on a family that's growing, new marriages coming in, new family members coming in. Do you have any suggestions for parents on that with new son-in-laws or daughter-in-laws, or yeah?
I think this is a very important topic because this topic, the parents need to do some work there anyway, even if there is no estrangement, right? Because there is something that's a very crucial moment where the family is changing, and you could see that it is hard for everyone. It is hard for the children, and it is hard for. It's a happy moment, right? But
Right.
it's a very complicated moment, and I think that when parents mismanage that moment, a lot of time there is a rupture in the family, you
Mhm.
know. And of course, again, it is never only one side's responsibility. But since we're talking to the parents, it's never only one side's responsibility, means that parents need to do the work too, not
Right.
only their children.
Right.
And
Well,
parents are parents, right? In the hierarchy, if we are saying parents are, the ones with the power, power comes with responsibility. Parents also have the responsibility.
well, it's very interesting because I have two my own boys and two
Huh.
stepchildren, and all the role of step family and the kids who were married and all of that. Um, it has been very clear how one's role changes dramatically
Yeah.
with marriages or being a stepmom. And the language that we're used to using is what we're used to using for like 30 years. And all of a sudden, a new family member comes in, and the parent has to change, and maybe a little late. Maybe you'll screw up a little bit or a lot of bit before you realize that doesn't work anymore. You
Right.
have to
Right.
make some changes in how of your role, not only, I hate to use the word power, but your role in the family.
Changed.
Yeah.
Definitely. First of all, I want to say we always screw up. That's part of human nature, right? And I think part of what we know as psychologists, there is a research that says that only 30% of the time we do things right. It's from infant research about good enough mothers are doing the right thing only 30% of the time. 70% of the time they do it wrong. And isn't that amazing for us? I know. But I think
That study come from? That's
that
terrible.
but I think it's great actually, because what
Oh,
it means is that what's important is not to do things perfectly and to always do it right. Is the repair, right? The ability to repair, to come back. What that research says is that 70% of the time you do it wrong, but then you will correct yourself, right? And that's what we're talking about. This is the main important thing, is the correction, the ability to really adapt and to change. Even as a therapist, the most contemporary perspective on therapy is that the therapist needs to change. I sit with a patient and they don't just adjust themselves to me. I find how I need to change a little bit in order to be with a certain person. And I think that is definitely true for parents. We always change, right? We always
well,
try to.
that is a very, very interesting and dynamic um, way of dealing with people. But there's also, I hear this a lot.
Uh-huh.
People get labeled. She's a difficult mother-in-law. She's a difficult mother. He's a grumpy, tough, domineering dad. This kind of thing is, you stick people with these titles, and then the family just kind of lands on that every time
Right.
they have an experience and say, well, that's why. So,
Yeah.
and the parents do that with the kids too. This is my
Exactly.
easy kid.
Yeah.
They're very light, and there's no problem, but I'm going to have a hard time with this one. He or she's a toughie, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
That labeling stuff's really, really hard in a family. And I think, I don't know,
Yeah.
like maybe this is an issue. Do you have a
Listen,
suggestion?
I think that this is really, really true what you're saying, right? Families give family members roles, right? In child therapy, even we think about there is the identified patient. Have you ever heard that? The identified patient is the one who comes to therapy, the child who comes to therapy, who actually holds all the family pathology. They are the sick one, right? But when you talk to that child, you understand that the whole family is in that, so to speak, sickness. right? So that's the identity, and we have, every family has identified patient in them, even if they're not a patient, if they don't go to therapy. So I think you're really right. That's the nature of families, is to give people roles. This is the good one, this is the difficult one, this is right. And I think the healthier the family is, the more flexibility there is in the roles. One day this one is the good one, the next one is that one, right? And again, I actually think, obviously, in childhood, that is the parents' role, responsibility. The parents' responsibility and job is to do the work, right? And understand that, yeah, it is easier to have those roles because then everything is clear. But as we know, right, as parents, things change all the time. Even as a child, right? You give your child something, the next day they say, "I told you I don't love that. I hate this food." What do you mean? Yesterday you loved it, but now I hate it, right? It's like
Exactly.
people change all the time. So I think you're right that we are against something that is in the nature of families,
Yeah,
and that the labeling.
right. So there's such a big takeaway here for this is so interesting. Could go on for a really long time because it's life. I mean, there's so much
Yeah,
to talk about here. But I think one of the big takeaways here is um, when we become parents, and if we became parents 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or for our readers, 40, even, however long ago, or new grandparents,
yeah,
we were brought up not as much as our parents, but definitely that there's an automatic respect because we are the parents.
right,
And that has allowed parents to get away with a lot.
right,
And you are calling and with your article and with it, and if for healthy family dynamics for parents, for and RBA 50 readers to take a good look at how we are speaking to our children, to each other, in a way that is not an automatic given right.
right.
That we need to listen differently and respond differently. And you're asking us to do that, aren't you?
Definitely. And you know what? Therefore, to teach our children to listen differently, right? I mean, there is a legacy there of how to listen when somebody else tells you how they feel. And we're all defensive, right? Parents and people who are not parents, they're immediately like, "I didn't do that. I didn't hurt you." But wait, slow down. What is the other person is saying, and how do we respond to that? So I think that is a big part of the work.
Well, that will be great if people have the opportunity to do the work and they haven't been back to where we started in the beginning, canceled, which I know sounds dismissive and labeled and culturally
Yeah,
trendy. But if somebody's not talking to someone, and I know you say it may not be forever, that is a panic situation. And
exactly.
for somebody,
Right, right.
probably the one
There
who's
is
been,
I think it's true to call it panic, because I think parents really, this is one of the most painful things that can happen to a parent, right? And so again, I don't dismiss the fact that everybody gets panicked when that happened. I've seen many parents, and all of them exactly that, get panicked and really hurt and really angry. And I think part of what we want to ask them is to really slow down for a second, right?
right.
Slow down and take a step back and really look at it, and not just try to do the counterintuitive thing, right? The intuitive thing is to go and try to get your child as the way you did it in childhood, like, come on, what are you doing, right?
Right.
And really let it, right, slow down a little bit and take a step back for a second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't go after your children.
That is great advice. And the other thing I would love for you to share is the impact on the whole family of playing that cancel card, not just between the child and the parent, but because you say they're part of a larger family. So
Mhm.
before that happens, it would be good to think about what the whole effect is of that. And can you speak a little bit about that?
You mean the impact of before the estrangement,
Yeah,
or
child, or well, maybe the parent's going to cancel the kid. We haven't even talked about that, but anyway,
Yeah.
this is the topic.
That is more disturbing actually, because when parents cancel their kids, it's usually for LGBT kids are being canceled. That is something that I heard too, in all the hundreds of emails I got. People say, hey, but you didn't say anything about my parents canceled me, right? For
Ah,
religious reasons, for political reasons, for LGBT. A lot of kids who are gay and lesbians and trans, are being, if we can call it, canceled, completely canceled by their parents, and
ah,
being really abused because of those things. So that's important.
that
Uh,
does it does feel, actually, we haven't used that word. The whole thing feels abusive to me.
yeah, it is very abusive. And
Canceling
I
feels
think we
abusive
have
by
to check
nature.
ourselves, right, about what seems abusive or not. I want to say something about what you said before. And I think that what I see in my practice about parents, the generational gap is also related to, and the respect that people used to give their parents. You see that a lot of, especially baby boomers, but not only, are very, surprised and shocked by this shift, especially because they see themselves as so, enlightened in so many ways, right?
Yes,
And
yes,
such good parents and such. And I think what sometimes the anger that underneath that we talk about in therapy is that they say my parents did not know anything about me. They were not, right. They were not empathic to me. My needs were not important, and my kids' needs were so important to me, and I need them to recognize that I'm a good parent, right? And when that collapses, when the children see how much we need our children, right, for reassurance that we're good parents, and when that doesn't happen, the parents get really angry. And I think anger is a key here,
yeah,
right?
interesting.
They get really angry, even if they hide it. There is some resentment underneath that the
Yeah,
children are not recognizing that I did it differently than my parents.
right. Wow. So I don't even know where to summarize that one.
Yeah,
But I think that comment about baby boomers feeling enlightened, that they're so good at it and they haven't been
I
so good
know,
at it,
right?
is really fascinating, really fascinating. And just to circle back on that dynamic of a one of the kids who canceled the parent and isn't showing up but loves their sibling, and the sibling has to deal with the angry parent at the we're back to the holidays, the holiday function, and that becomes like the hot topic, the elephant in the room,
Right.
or not the elephant. They're really talking about it all the time. It's the topic.
Yeah.
Um, the impact of this shutting out someone to make a point
Right.
is so beyond, it seems, the person and the relationship. I mean, it
It
just has.
definitely impacts the whole system, and I think it's a good point to add siblings into it, or grandparents. I got emails from grandparents, right? And I got an email from a woman, 85 years old, saying there is a situation in my family between her child and her grandchild, and I am heartbroken. I think it's not going to be resolved in my lifetime. And
Right,
it impacts everyone, right? Those
right,
are the kind of things that impacts everyone. And you were right to add siblings to it, because I think siblings have a lot of times conflicts of loyalty. Don't forget that sometimes the siblings are canceled with the family, so then they don't have a conflict as much, but in other times they have a conflict because there is a relationship between the sibling and the siblings,
right.
and they are. But what I see, and I think that is something really incredible about this younger generation, the word boundaries is a really, really, really powerful and important thing that people are working on. So
Right.
these kids, often the siblings are saying to the parents, do not talk to me about my siblings. This is the boundary that I need.
Yeah,
To involve me. And you see that this is the work that the younger generation have done much more than the older, right? The work of boundaries.
Well, I think without even going to therapy, they're using all of this language. And I am assuming they're getting all of this enlightenment on social media. I don't know, because unless they're reading books on psychology or maybe from each other, I don't
From the
know.
culture, I think. Don't forget, the social media is responding to the culture too.
Right.
This is not a product of social media, right? Social media is responding to what's happening in the culture.
Okay.
And therefore, right, they are getting it from the culture, and then the culture is very much about boundaries right now. And I
Right.
think that is actually a healthy thing, right?
Yes.
If you think about it, canceling your parents does not allow you to work on boundaries, right? Boundaries is not cutting somebody off. Boundaries is really the ability to say, this is what I need. And, this is right. Don't cross that line, which is really important. Older generation did not, no one couldn't do it, with their parents.
No, no. It's just, this is the way I am, deal with it or not.
Right.
That's the way that
Take it or leave it, right? Backfired.
And that is the language we've learned, and we have to unlearn that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It
still
does.
honor who we are. You know, you can't change your personality just because somebody says, I don't want you to say that to me, because it's a complicated dance.
Right.
You know,
I think the complicated dance is really related to sadomasochism, because if you feel that, right, that part of it is feeling like there is some dynamic of domination and submission, who's submitting to, right? We're talking about power. So I think it's an interesting dance there of how to not feel that your child becomes right, dominating and sadistic to you, right? And but also to not respond with some kind of resentment and sadism, right? This whole thing, there must be awareness to power dynamics. I think that's what the younger generation is talking about, right? The
well,
domination and submission.
that word you just used is a really big word. So,
Right.
that a child will, kind of hand slap a parent so much, like you shouldn't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, that they're like, okay, I
Right.
don't even know what I'm supposed to, I don't even know how to open my mouth
I
anymore.
think that is really true. And this is the dynamic of doer and done to, right? A complementary role play that involves splitting, right? And then we flip. I think that's what I said in the
It involves, wait, it involves what? Splitting?
splitting, right? And
Yes.
where the assumption is that one is top and one is bottom. That's exactly, tops and bottoms is also maybe a foreign language to some generation, but it's the younger generation language of, right, and domination and submission. And the whole idea that somebody could make the whole power,
Right.
right? Awareness to power. And I
Yeah.
think that there is something about how the roles are flipped, could flip, right?
Right. Right.
Where bottoms becomes tops and tops become bottoms. So what we are trying to really do, and especially in family therapy, is to be aware that we would like to have mutuality, and not sadomasochism, and not dominations and submissions. We don't want anybody to feel that they are right. And again, that could, as I said before about healthy systems. Healthy system is systems when there is movement, right?
Right.
When we're not stuck in one position, when things change. Sometimes you feel you're top, sometimes you're bottom, sometimes you feel dominated, sometimes you're I see your face.
I
It becomes more and
okay.
more complicated, right?
Well, I can see that this conversation, as we mentioned, could go on for a long time, because it is dynamic. It
Yeah.
is dynamic. It requires communication.
Yeah.
Even these words that you're throwing out have changed their meaning over time. Some
Right.
some have, a sexual
Yeah.
implications that no longer do, because you're talking about them in a family dynamic in this particular context.
Uh-huh.
But we're learning. I mean, Galit, you are teaching us right here. This is
Yeah.
fantastic to have this conversation, and I'm really hoping that it sparks more conversation for those who are going to listen to this all the way through. It's quite lengthy, but taking this conversation and bringing it to the dinner table, maybe even the holiday table,
Yeah.
or onto a long walk with either your peers or your children, because this is very important. This is a very
Yeah.
important, healthy conversation to be having. And thank you.
No, I think this is what you're saying is the essence of it. The way you listen to me, trying to, when you see, I also juggle, trying to hold everybody in mind, the older generation, the younger generation. That is the work. The work is to hold ourselves in mind and hold our children in mind and listen and grow and know that this is a complicated work of listening, work of growing, right? The work of really like, oh, I never thought about that. Tell me more about it. What does it
Well,
mean about me? What does it mean about our family, right? It's work.
the good news is the reason hopefully people are listening is because they want to be in a relationship. They want the family to be healthy, and it's worth it because you have to think it's worth it in order to be willing to do the work. And I can't imagine thinking otherwise, but
Yeah.
anyway, that's important.
Families are the most complicated thing, and there is everything in families, right? They could be disappointing. And every feeling exists in a family, and every pathology can exist in a family, right? So it's true. It is something that could evolve.
Yes. Well, I love the name of your new book, Emotional Inheritance. It is yeah, it feels like the next 20 what with 22 and me. No, what's it called?
23 and me.
23 and me, sorry, 23 and
One.
I won. Yeah, really, the emotional dynamic of that. It's sounds very powerful, and I'm definitely going to order it. And I would like to continue our conversation. We talked about doing another session, so hopefully we have a great conversation coming up in the new year that people can listen to.
I would love to do that, because I think it will be a continuing conversation because emotional inheritance is a book about families, right? It's not about estrangement, it's about everything that happens in families, intergenerational transmission of emotions, what we right, pass down to the next generation, the traumas that our parents pass to us, and everything that lives in between the generations in families.
Okay, well then to be continued in 2022. Galit, we will be we'll be ordering your book. We'll put the link up on that and the link up to your article in the LA Times that's sparked this conversation. And thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. It was a pleasure for me.